Hi, can you hear me? Can I be heard? Hello? This is Howard Pollick. Can anybody hear me? Hello?
Hi, Howard. I can hear you fine. This is Kathy with El Dorado County.
Thank you very much for responding.
You're quite welcome.
Checking the technology.
There you go.
Yeah. So I see we have 24 people on the call, which is great. We'll start at around 10 o'clock, give people a chance to log in. Record.
So I can see that the recording has started, and there's your first slide.
Right. And then the issue for me is accessing the manage the participants, submit all. Can you see my participant list on the screen?
No, I cannot.
Okay, well that's
so
good.
it's if you found some way to admit all, I think that was the magic touch.
Right.
Perfect.
But
so now as a viewer, I have my participant list on the right because I chose to list it that way, and your Caries in California slide is up front and perfect.
Okay. All right, so I want to thank everybody for joining us this morning or this afternoon, wherever you are. And my name's Howard Pollick. I think you know me by now. Some people may be new. And so I have been running this course for the last 7 years or so, after taking over from Steve Silverstein. And then before him, I think it was Jane Weintraub. And we will continue this series in the fall. Traditionally, we have not held this series in the summer. So, and then there may be a new person who is leading this series at that time. And so I just wanted to say thank you for all the times that you've all participated in this. I want to thank Dorian Hollis for putting all the information together on the website. You'll see that there are 3 documents, actually 4 documents on the website that you can download or view, and including today's slides in a PDF format. And I am going to be sharing my screens on a PowerPoint And so you'll see individual clicks that you won't see in the PowerPoint. Just some logistical issues there. So I felt like this might be kind of a swan song for me, and I thought I would share with you my experiences and what I have found out about tooth decay or dental caries in California. Because some 27 years ago, I embarked on a needs assessment, oral health needs assessment of children, and I really haven't shared that information with you all. And so part of what I'm going to do today includes that. So I've advanced to the second slide. And for some folks on the line, they may not be familiar with all the details about tooth decay, so I thought I would share some of what tooth decay is, what dental caries is, the disease that we call caries. I always tell my students there is no such word as carie. It's like diabetes. There's no diabetes. It's not a plural noun. It just happens to be a noun with an S on the end of it. With regard to tooth decay, it occurs in primary teeth, and it occurs in permanent teeth. And you see a picture there of some decay in primary dentition or deciduous dentition. Here are the molars on the upper arch, and the central incisors have some decay on the mesial and incisal surfaces, and again on the molars on the other side. Let me just make sure I'm on the right place. So tooth decay happens on coronal surfaces, on the crowns of teeth, in the pits and fissures that you can see. The black stains here, which are probably much more advanced than what you see in the surface of the tooth, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Tooth decay could start on a pit and fissure surface, but could advance to include the pulp of the tooth. This is a root canal treatment here about to begin with a rubber dam clamp and a white rubber dam, and the tooth decay has been removed and exposed the pulp underneath there. This is the enamel, the dentine beneath that, and the pulp beneath that. Tooth decay occurs on the aproximal surfaces between the teeth, particularly on the molars. And so you'll see here that there's a slide that is showing the molar here with an occlusal amalgam filling. But of interest, particularly this is one of my patients, I took the photograph not because of the amalgam buildup following a root canal treatment on the tooth in front of it, but because of this white lesion with a little brown stain in the center of it that represents the tooth decay that started between the teeth that we would not otherwise see because the tooth in front of it would hide it. So this is a common site for tooth decay, and the decay is probably much more advanced than this white stain on the surface of the tooth, which is a really demineralization, loss of minerals in that tooth. And even though there's no cavitation at this point, there's no hole, the decay is probably much more advanced beneath the surface into the dentine of the tooth. Tooth decay also occurs on the root surface of the tooth, and you can see here the root surface of that cuspid tooth, and also you see a couple of crowns in the teeth behind. Tooth decay may or may not cause pain. Doesn't always. We see a lot of patients who have advanced tooth decay and they say, I've never had any pain. So that's doesn't always occur. Certainly it's an infection within the tooth. But the infection may go beyond the tooth and cause abscess formation. And then we deal with the restoration and the cost of restoration of the teeth. The root canal treatments that may be necessary, which are more expensive. Teeth could be extracted. And this is an extracted tooth with an extensive carious lesion on the root surface of the tooth. And then we deal with replacement of teeth that is much more expensive with partial dentures, fixed bridge work, implants and crowns and the rest. So I just wanted to share all of that with you so that you're aware of the complexity of what tooth decay is. The serious infection, and the infection may go systemically, and we know that individuals have died as a consequence of untreated tooth decay. So we go to the next slide, and sometimes tooth decay is obvious. Obvious discoloration you see in the deciduous or primary teeth here. And so it doesn't take an expert eye to see that. In terms of surveys that we do of caries, we really don't have to have a dentist examine children to be able to say, yeah, there's caries in these teeth, even though it may not go to the extent of cavitation that we see on the other side. And obviously, these teeth may be causing pain, may not be causing pain, but these cavities have been like this for a long time. Parents may not be aware of it. Child may not have complained of pain. And with the lips closed, and if the parent's not brushing the teeth for the child, then they may not be aware of this until all of a sudden in the middle of the night, there's pain and abscess, and maybe a visit to the emergency room is indicated. Sorry, I'm just playing around with the participants list, admitting people as they join. It's much more expensive into the dentine of the tooth, and if you look at the slide on the left, these pictures of teeth on the top, ICDAS is an international diagnosis, assessment of the pits and fissures of teeth as well as other surfaces. And so from the left, you see no decay, decay starting between the teeth here, more extensive decay as we move to the right, ICDAS 3 and 4, and then starting of cavitation, an extensive lesion. And you can see that the X-ray appearance of these particular teeth, this is normal. This is a bite block between the teeth when taking the X-ray, although there may be caries on this upper tooth here on the mesial surface. The dark area in the middle of the tooth is the pulp. Decay beginning in the interproximal or aproximal surface, moving into the dentine below the enamel. And then as we move to ICDAS 3 and 4, you can see the very large, extensive decay underneath the tooth that is just not apparent when looking, eyeballing at the tooth, and much more extensive here as we see the start of cavitation. So when we see decay on the surface of the teeth, it's often much more extensive than it appears on the surface. And then the crown is sorry, I just want to go back to that slide. The crown is very obvious. This is a stainless steel crown that often is the preferred choice of dentists and pediatric dentists in restoring deciduous molars and other teeth. So, like I say, yes, anybody can probably look at these teeth and say there's a filling or a crown, there is some decay, but the initial stages, it may be less obvious, and a more experienced eye may be indicated. So we'll go to the next slide, and this is showing tooth-colored fillings and sealants. And here you see on the left, the top left, the stain in the tooth, and the dentist went in and drilled to find the extent of the decay, and the dark brown area in the dentine indicates what is probably arrested caries or decay that's not soft anymore and can be left underneath the restoration that will seal this and prevent further sugars entering in this to feed the bacteria, and the bacteria that remain will probably die. We don't do bacterial sampling of teeth because it's such a frequent procedure and expensive procedure to do. It's a frequent procedure to do the restorations, expensive procedure to do bacterial sampling, so we don't do bacterial sampling. And then a restoration in a tooth-colored material, and not even an expert eye of a dentist may even detect this as a filling on the top right there. On the bottom, you see a fissure system in this molar here, and maybe a little brown stain in the center of the tooth. And the dentist or person who was going to provide a sealant to this tooth decided that a sealant would be a preferable way of dealing with this rather than drilling into the tooth. A sealant can be placed without a local anesthetic. And here you see what a sealant looks like. The white sealant shows up so that when we re-examine a child, we can see if the sealant is there or not. It's not anesthetic at the back of the mouth to have that white area, but that may be confused with the white area of demineralized enamel. So again, this may require a trained eye to detect if this is a sealant. Typically, we don't think of a sealant as a restoration, but as a preventive treatment, and we don't include it in the traditional count of tooth decay, whereas a filling we do include as a treated form of tooth decay. So when we look at untreated and treated tooth decay, in various surveys, we use terms that are not interchangeable, but are confused oftentimes. So I wanted to explain them. So in terms of what decay or caries prevalence is, it's recorded at one point or one period of time. We may examine a population over several months, let's say, or even a year, or even several years. We're using a sample of the population, so hopefully that sample is representative of the entire population. Oftentimes it is not, and that produces bias in our estimate of the population level of caries. We're looking at the percent of individuals with any evidence of tooth decay when we're talking about prevalence. It could be one cavity, one small filling, or it could be many cavities or many fillings. No matter how many teeth or surfaces are affected, or how badly. It could be one tooth with a need for root canal or extraction. But in terms of caries prevalence, it counts. So we may often be looking at untreated caries because in surveys of treatment needs, that's really all we're looking for is how much treatment needs to be delivered to, obviously with a particular patient, with this particular patient, but also with a population group, how much treatment is needed by this population group. And we may be looking at treated tooth decay, as I've shown previously. In terms of severity, again, we're looking at one point or period of time, again with a sample of the population. Here we're looking at the average number of teeth or tooth surfaces affected by tooth decay per individual. So obviously it's with a group, and we average out what the number of teeth is that's affected, that's either untreated decay or treated. And in terms of treatment, it could be filled or extracted teeth. With primary teeth, we use the lower case letters, DFS, to represent decayed or filled primary teeth surfaces. In a very young population under the age of, let's say, 5, we may be looking at missing teeth, missing due to caries, particularly molars, whereas the anterior teeth may be naturally exfoliated at a young age. And with permanent teeth, we use the uppercase letters DMFS or DMFT to represent the decayed or missing due to caries or extraction due to caries, rather than missing due to some other reason, trauma, for instance, or periodontal disease in older population. When we're talking about surveys, there's a difference between assessment and diagnosis. So with assessment, we use our eyes, and hopefully people are using corrected lenses. There was a study done in Australia many years ago to look at people attending the Australian annual dental association meeting, and there was an optometrist or ophthalmologist set up to provide a screening. And it turned out that 1/3 of the dentists needed corrected lenses that they didn't have. Are we using a mouth mirror or not? That might make a difference. Are we using an explorer or not? That might make a difference. Typically now, we try not to use very sharp explorers that might actually cause cavitation in an uncavitated carious situation. We're using the available light or a flashlight, or there may be a portable stand with a light on it. We don't use x-rays in assessments and surveys. And we tend, therefore, to underestimate the degree of caries, whether it's talking about prevalence or severity. Oftentimes, it's difficult to assess if a tooth has been extracted due to caries. And so, again, that may take a trained eye. Sorry, just playing around with the participants and admitting Rosanna Jackson there. The diagnosis, again, we need corrected lenses for our eyes. Oftentimes, nowadays, people will have loupes and magnifying lenses that really make us very aware of all the small changes. We will use a mouth mirror. We will use an explorer, although, again, we shouldn't be pushing hard on an uncavitated lesion. We'll use a dental light or headlight, and x-rays that can identify the proximal caries between the teeth, the depth of that caries, whether root canal treatment has been previously provided, or whether it may be needed, or even a need for extraction that we may not be able to tell from the assessment. So oftentimes an assessment, as I said, is an underestimate, and when patients or individuals who've been part of the survey then go to their dentist, the dentist may say, well, I see many more cavities than you thought you had, or they're deeper, or there may be a difference, and that's one of the reasons. So, caries in its early and late stages. In the early stages, probably in the enamel only, there may be poor agreement or reliability within the same individual looking at the same situation on different occasions, or between different examiners. So, one of the questions that I want to pose in our discussion later is, what is a cavity? What is caries? Does it have to be substantiated by a second person? Some surveys ignore early signs of caries because it's difficult to get agreement, and so only rely upon the late stages of decay. And the examiners are told, when in doubt, use the lesser category, so that if you're not sure if it's caries, there's no caries. When I did the survey 20 odd years ago, we had a category for if you're in doubt on a occlusal surface of a molar, whether there's caries or not, indicate there's a sealant needed. In the late stages, it's dentine caries, whether you put an E on the end of dentine or not. There's usually good agreement and reliability within the same individual or between different examiners. And to do a survey appropriately, there has to be a measure of reliability between the examiners or within the same examiner to be sure that the assessment is correct. I'll be talking about that shortly. So, in terms of differences in survey data, is it a real difference or true difference? Yes, if there's high agreement and reliability between the examiners. Any difference may be due to age differences in the same population over time. Measuring the impact of an intervention, is this a survey in order to just assess treatment needs, or are we trying to assess whether or not a certain risk factor, let's say the frequency of eating sugar, or a preventive factor, let's say living in a fluoridated area, is this going to make a difference? And is there a true control group to measure this against, particularly if it's a survey that's done before and after an intervening time period? So any changes that there may be over time have to be thought of in terms of risk factors and preventive factors. For instance, dental sealants weren't always part of the California Medicaid program or Denti-Cal program. And so any changes may be due to change in policy rather than a change in tooth decay. So maybe it's not a real or it's an untrue difference because there's poor agreement. So is the difference not real, but just a difference in the reliability between the examiners? And is it due to selecting different samples that are not representative of the population? For instance, when we organized our school-based survey, we quickly found out that some schools are not well integrated, either economically, by socioeconomic status, or by race or ethnicity. Some schools are 100% more ethnically diverse, and some are not diverse at all. So you have to be thinking in terms of, is this a representative sample? Or we're not using the appropriate statistical analysis, and we need to have obviously a statistician not only at the end when we've collected the data, but to help us in setting up the survey so that we're not biased. So researchers must, and we use this expression, bend over backwards to reduce the possibility that the results are due to improper methods. Rather than just going in, having somebody take a look at the teeth and say, we have 10% of the children who have tooth decay here. Is that a real assessment of the total population, or is it just that one dentist or hygienist, whoever in that particular school? So how do we reduce discrepancies in data? Calibration. We have to have a training session. One person is designated as the gold standard who says this is decay, this is not decay, and we use that person to judge the other dentist by, or the other hygienist by. There has to be independent assessments of the same individual without knowledge of the previous assessment, so that you then compare those assessments of the same subject, discuss any differences, and sometimes we have to let go individuals who are too strict or too lenient in their application of the standards and the methods. Should we use dentists or hygienists or dental assistants or others for these surveys? Well, certainly dentists may be more familiar with caries, fillings, and sealants, but some surveys have shown with proper training and proper calibration that there may not be that much of a difference. It may depend upon the budget. If you've got a lot of money, then maybe you can pay the dentist more. Are they volunteers or are they paid? The recorders have to be accurate as well. So we want to make sure that when I say a certain tooth was decayed on a certain surface, I want to be sure that the recorder records that accurately, either on a paper document or on a computer of some kind. So again, we must bend over backwards to reduce the possibility that the results are due to improper methods. So on the website that's for this series, there are some documents. One is the Cognac training manual that I put together in 1993. Then the full report of the oral health needs assessment of children for California. And then a document that I found in the library at UCSF that shows how to do a survey that was put together in 1955, which I think is a very worthwhile document to take a look at and for you to have. So this is the cover sheet of one of the earliest surveys that I was able to find from 1936. It's a dental survey of San Francisco elementary school children. Some 46,000 children were screened, nearly an entire census of the children aged 6 to 14. This was done as part of the WPA at the time, the Works Progress Administration, both by the Department of Public Health and the local dental society. What they found was at age 11, the mean number of untreated caries permanent teeth, on average, almost 2 teeth per child, and then 3 teeth per child at age 14. Remembering that the 12-year permanent molars, second molars, come through at age 12, and then many of them will decay in the first 2 years. What they also found that more than 40% of 8-year-olds had pulpal involvement or needed an extraction of a deciduous or a permanent tooth. By age 14, 1 in 7 14-year-olds had pulpal involvement or extractions were indicated. Remembering that for 8-year-olds, you've got the mixed dentition of primary and permanent teeth, and by 14, all of the primary teeth have been exfoliated, naturally lost to the tooth fairy. There was particular interest in 1936 about 6-year molars. That's the first permanent molar that comes in behind all the baby teeth. And they found that 30% of 6-year molars were carious for the age groups 8 to 14. And an estimated additional 20% have already been treated. They didn't look at treated tooth decay in this survey. They just estimated it. In terms of deciduous teeth, by age 8, in addition to the need for extraction of pulpal treatment, untreated caries peaks at about 23%, or 1 in 4 or 5 children needing some kind of treatment. Another survey in Oakland, 1951, looked at over 14,000 children aged 5 to 17, and just one dentist, Lloyd Richards, who was the supervising dentist at that time and later became the head of the California oral health or dental health unit. Even 5-year-old children may get a permanent molar, and although there weren't that many of them, for those 5-year-old children, almost half of them had decay in the tooth almost as it erupted. although decay doesn't occur before the tooth erupts. Certainly when it's exposed to the oral environment, it can become decayed. Again, going up to 84% of 8-year-olds had permanent tooth decay. 80% or 81% prevalence of permanent decay for all children. And there was a interestingly higher prevalence in higher and middle income areas. And we can speculate why that might be. They didn't do a diet assessment, but perhaps the higher and middle income areas, those children had greater access to sweets and candies that weren't available, too costly perhaps, for the low-income family. Remembering in 1951, there was no fluoride toothpaste, and fluoridation of water supplies had just begun nationally after the community trials that started in 1945. Oakland did not get fluoridated till the 1970s. So looking at the ages of the children from 11 to 17, large numbers of pupils were examined. In terms of the numbers of decayed, missing, or filled permanent teeth per child, you can see by 11, 4 teeth had already succumbed to tooth decay, either untreated or treated. And by 15, it plateaued out at about 10 or 11 teeth per child. In terms of the percent of pupils with missing due to caries permanent teeth, you can see that goes from about 18% at age 11 up to 45% by age 17. So it was very common for children to have a permanent tooth extracted because of tooth decay at that time. Chronologically, moving forward, I found a document that was written by the Assistant Attorney General for the state of California on fluoridation of domestic water supplies. And this is a 22-page document. So it's well worth reading. And I just put here some of a concluding statement that the California State Board of Public Health in 1950 issued a statement to the effect that it approved the addition of fluoride to public water supplies. So we've had that public policy for quite some time. The 1955 document, Dental Caries Survey, Who, Why, or How, used to be available at the UCSF library. And, now it's not, it's missing from that library. So through Interlibrary Loan, I was able to get a copy from UCLA's library. And it's a comprehensive document that talks about why do a dental survey, planning for it, publicity for it, all the way to selecting a sample, suggested letters to parents, how you use the IBM equipment in 1955 to analyze the data, etc. So even before personal computers were available, there was IBM equipment. Lloyd Richards, who I mentioned earlier, published in 1957 a survey of dental caries in school children in parts of Los Angeles City, and produced this graph looking at DMF up from 0 to 10 teeth, and for the ages 9 through 14, looking at permanent teeth. And for different zones in Los Angeles, there was different levels of naturally occurring fluoride. And then for California as a whole, you see there's a higher level of tooth decay, with the sort of comparison community from Aurora, Illinois, where the fluoride in the drinking water was known to be about 1.2 parts per million. Notice that caries severity increases, particularly from age 12 to 14. As I mentioned again, The eruption of the second permanent molar occurs at this time, and so you get a continued increase in tooth decay. Chronologically, moving forward, Lloyd Richards delivered an address to the American Association for the Advancement of Science symposium that occurred in Berkeley at that time in 1965. And I just think it's worth sharing what he said about about the state of oral health in California at that time. And he said, dental caries is to a great extent preventable. At least a third of dental caries can be prevented simply by drinking water that contains the proper amount of fluoride, especially during the period that the permanent dentition is forming. And I might add, permanent dentition not only forming, but also coming into the mouth. Any community can adjust the fluoride content of its water supplies to the proper level, which at that time was 1 part per million. Controlled fluoridation of community water supplies has been scientifically proved beyond any reasonable doubt to be a safe, practical, economical, and effective method for the prevention of dental caries. He goes on to say that fluoridation makes children healthier, saves parents many dollars, saves the community and state millions of dollars in dental care for the indigent and institutionalized, and because of the resulting shorter time required for dental treatment, makes it possible for more people to obtain needed dental care. Everyone benefits. Yet, when parents and others in a community are asked whether or not they want fluoridation, then they'll more often than not decide against it. So tooth decay continues to occur at a high rate. Parents continue to put off obtaining needed dental care for their children and themselves. Treatment needs increase in severity and complexity, and the cost of dental care increases commensurately. I may add that, as I'll show you later, I'm transmitting this morning from Santa Maria, a community in Southern California that decided to fluoridate. Let me go back. Decided to fluoridate in 2002, and the city council made that decision, and then it was supported by a referendum. And then just 6 months ago, through budget considerations, fluoridation was stopped without discussion of the implications. And so tonight I'm here down in Santa Maria with Marjorie Stocks, and we're going to present testimony before the City Council to try to get that reinstated. Lloyd Richards, again, published in '67 something from a similar survey that he conducted. Here he looked at non-fluoride enamel hyperplasia in various varying fluoride temperature zones. At that time, there was policy based on evidence that if you lived in a colder climate, then you should have a higher level of fluoride in the water because you're not drinking as much compared to a hotter climate. And so I just wanted to share with you the communities that he went to with his team to investigate this. They examined over 7,000 children, and 38% of them had some form of non-fluoride hypoplasia. The reason I bring this up is there's some confusion recently, as I think I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, about dental fluorosis and the differences in measurement of dental fluorosis. There are a lot of other conditions that show teeth to have some form of changes in the appearance, and this study is important because it shows the prevalence of those changes in non-fluoride situations. Remember, at this stage, yes, fluoride toothpaste had come into being. Maybe some children were swallowing it, but it wasn't considered to be due to fluoride in the water or fluoride. And 94% of the enamel opacities were the opacitors were in the enamel. The maxillary teeth were affected 3 times as often as mandibular teeth. This could be due to mouth breathing and exposure of those upper incisors. And the maxillary incisors were the teeth most frequently affected. No definite relationship emerges, he and his team said, between the occurrence of non-fluoride enamel hyperplasia and the fluoride levels of community water. And then part of the same study, looking at what should be the optimum level of fluoride in community water supplies in relationship to temperature, we found that there was insufficient numbers of communities in California to do the study, so he went to other states as well. And this is a list of the states and the individual communities. So on the top row here, you've got the fluoride concentration, 0.15 parts per million or less, and 1.8 parts per million or more, and several ranges in between. And then the maximum temperature, mean temperature of over a 5-year period for that community, where it may be 65 degrees or lower, such as in Berkeley, California, where I live, or as higher than 80 degrees fluoride, as would be in Del Rio in Texas, and certain communities in California. And you see the other states, Colorado, and in particular, Arizona, Texas, and so forth. So they did a complete assessment of many communities to validate the idea that fluoride should be a different concentration, perhaps, to achieve the same level of benefit, and that the different concentration according to temperature zone. So I'll move now to fluoride surveys and stories. If you have questions, please go to the chat line and let me just see if there's any questions at this point. I don't see any right now. So as you're thinking of questions, please jot them down and we can go back to them at the end. Appreciate that. So, Steve Silverstein, Jared Fine, and I were involved with the evaluation of the California Children's Dental Disease Prevention Program, known as the CCDDPP program, or C2D2P2. This was enacted by legislation in 1978-79, and as part of the legislation, an evaluation was required. And Steve Silverstein was the primary investigator. You should know that at that time, in the 80s, there was 250,000 children in K through 6 grades participating in 37, or about more than half of the counties in California at that time. And we went to 2 communities in 1981-82 to assess the level of decay in those children, and also look at gingivitis. And we followed it up 2 years later. And I should say that 2 years is a small amount of time, a short period of time, to assess the progress of clinically detectable tooth decay. We would have liked more time, but the legislature required the report by 1985. We used historical controls rather than concurrent controls. That is, we looked at kindergarten in 81 and we looked at kindergarten in 83 and compared them. We didn't look at the same children who were in kindergarten in 81 and then 2 years later in, let's say, 2nd grade, just because of age differences in the teeth. And so I see a question online. Hi, Dr. Pollick, would you please tell Kathy to turn off her video? It is a flashing light and very distracting. Thank you. So let me see if I can turn off a video here. There's a video there I'm going to turn on. Sorry. I'm trying.
Thanks, Dr. Pollock. I tried to do it myself, but I'm not able to. Dorian,
Okay. All right. Okay.
It might be a right click over the name of Kathy or in the lower left where it looks like a
I'm
movie
managing
camera.
it. I'm managing it. Let me put more. Okay. I'm sorry. I'm just going one by one to stop the videos. So if people would stop their video, that would be great. It's going to take me too long to do that. Okay, thanks. We chose two sites, Barstow and Victorville in San Bernardino County in the high desert of Southern California. They have fluoride levels naturally occurring in their water that are at the optimum range. And the low fluoride site, the low fluoride in the water site, was Monterey and areas around Monterey, that school district. And for details of the actual legislation, you can click on the link there. I'm just stopping video. Sorry for the delay. Okay, I think that probably takes care of that. So this report was put out by our UCSF School of Dentistry in what was then the Department of Dental Public Health and Hygiene. And the key findings, the key findings were that the majority of children in this study, population in grades K through 6, had no decay, whether they were in the high fluoride area or the optimum fluoride area or the low fluoride area. But some children had substantial amounts of decay and considerable need for treatment. In fact, 25% of children had 80% of the decay. This has been reported in other studies. So no longer was tooth decay the ubiquitous disease that everybody suffered. It was now much more concentrated in a small group of children. Approximately 90% of decay occurred in the surfaces of permanent teeth that have sealable pits and fissures. And at this time, you know, the Dentical program and other policies certainly had been recommending dental sealants, but adoption of dental sealants by the dental community was slow. These children who experienced dental decay in their primary teeth were likely to experience 50% of the decay by the time they were in kindergarten. So if you're starting a program in kindergarten to reduce tooth decay, it's not going to affect those children already affected by tooth decay. And so we have to start much earlier than kindergarten. Non-white children, we assessed just visually the ethnicity or race of the children, which I have problems with right now, but that's what we did then. Had substantially more decay and treatment needs than white children. Children in the fluoridated side have less dental decay than children in the non-fluoridated side. Significant reductions in gingivitis occurred in all grade levels, and the cost of restoring the children's teeth declined as a result of participating in this dental disease prevention program. Picture of Bob Eisenman there, who persuaded me to become the oral epidemiologist and the principal investigator for the California Oral Health Needs Assessment of Children that he managed to persuade the Department of Public Health to support, and we had an extensive advisory committee, and you can see the members of the advisory committee in the document that was available on the website. In particular, there was a physician from Davis, Robert Bates, as part of that advisory committee, who said, if we don't get something about fluoridation out of this needs assessment, we're wasting our time. So he was very influential in persuading us to incorporate fluoridation status as part of this needs assessment, so that we weren't just finding out who needs treatment, how many people need treatment, how many children need treatment, but also, was there a difference in treatment needs as a result of fluoridation status where they lived? And so we were able to get questionnaire data ahead of the dental screening that the examiners were not privy to, that wouldn't bias them, that would determine their residents and whether or not they were lifetime residents in that community. That's important when you're doing that kind of assessment. So I'm getting a message that my internet connection is unstable. If somebody tells me they can't hear me anymore or see this, please let me know. So this was a letter from Jared Fine, who was chairman of the Dental Health Foundation at that time, back in 1994, creating the California Fluoridation Task Force that was created as part of the what created the Dental Health Foundation, which was money from a newspaper man down in Southern California who felt like we ought to be doing something about fluoridation in California because we ranked really low on the list of states that had fluoridated water. And so he donated, I think it was $50,000 at that time, to create the Dental Health Foundation to focus on fluoridation. Tim Collins was the chair. At that time, he was the dental director for Los Angeles. And Marjorie Starks was the person who really put everything into place in terms of logistics for the task force, and continues to work on fluoridation through our UCSF technical assistance program. We put out newsletters called California Fluoridation Now, and we were very active over a period of time and very influential in getting financing from foundations to initiate fluoridation in many communities in California. The report of the California Oral Health Needs Assessment was sent as a draft to the Maternal and Child Health Branch, which had initiated the survey, and that was done in 1994. And as a result of that, the MCH branch put out a document called Beyond Brushing and Braces in 1995, and you see the cover page of that. It wasn't heavy on statistics from the survey, but it was basically a promotional piece on oral health. We presented findings at the American Public Health Association meetings in 95 and 97, and also the California Dental Association. You see pictures of what we looked back then, Jared Fine, Bob Eisman, and myself, conveyed our findings, our highlights, policy implications to the California Dental Association meetings. And then in 1995, going back, that was 95, this is a photograph of Jackie Spear, who was then in the California State Assembly. She's now in Congress and a very prominent member of Congress. She authored the bill in 1995 called AB 733, which was passed and signed by Governor Wilson in spite of opposition by anti-fluoridationists. Jackie said that those anti-fluoridationists burned out 2 fax machines in her office. And the legislation mandated the fluoridation system fluoridation of water systems with 10,000 service connections, which is a connection to your house or apartment, or more when funding is available. And just as a reminder, this is a picture of John Yanis, who at that time was the national anti-fluoridation leader. He since passed away in 2002 or so. So how did the California fluoridation law come about? Well, there was statewide data. They played a part, but the reports came out later. The first report came out in 1997, beyond the one that MCH put out. And then the full reports, even though the draft had been submitted essentially with the same data, the same findings, that had previously been sent to MCH but not made publicly available in 1994, this was put out 5 years later. So, a neglected epidemic, that was a term coined by Myron Alukian, I believe, in Boston about caries at that time, and this is the title that we gave to this selected findings and recommendation. And then the full report was published by the Dental Health Foundation. As well as myself, Bob Eisman is named there, Jared Fine, Joanne Wellman, who's now Joanne Benson, who was the primary logistics person. Patricia Kipnis, friend and colleague, is the statistician. Jim Ellison was in charge of all the data and data cleaning and data management. So it was a great team, and we put this document together. So I wanted to share with you the training manual that we had for the epidemiological survey for examiners and recorders, and we have that available to you on our UCSF DPH website. And it goes into the methods, and again, that's the website, and you can view the training manual. I'm not going to go into the details of it. It's an extensive document. And then further details of the survey methodology are in the more comprehensive document. As part of the training, we used 2 published documents. One was by the World Health Organization. At that time, it was the 3rd edition of Oral Health Surveys, Birth-Suit Methods, now in its 5th edition. And I wanted to share with you the photographs that were available to us from that document. All the examiners had a copy of these of this document. So when we did fluorosis measurements, for instance, they had these photographs as a guide, as well as the written documentation of when to call something normal, questionable, very mild, moderate, or severe. And these photographs were courtesy of Dr. Evans from Hong Kong. And so you see on the top left, normal, and then questionable, and then going to what would be, I guess, C here is very mild, where only a small portion of the tooth is affected. You can disregard the very white reflection of the light that was used. That's not part of the tooth. That's another consideration we have to take into account when we're looking at dental fluorosis, especially in photographs. And then when slightly more of the tooth is affected, this item D is mild. And then when more than about half of the tooth is affected, it's moderate. And then when you get the staining and brown staining and sometimes pitting of the tooth, then we call that severe dental fluorosis. Alongside that, in the same publication, there was what looks at fluorosis in terms of normal appearance of molar teeth. But here on the second item is what's considered to be very mild fluorosis. This white snow capping of the cusps is considered dental fluorosis. Okay, obviously not too many people are concerned about that. Going back, here is evidence of decay in this primary molar here. And then further white capping of the molars on this photograph It's a reflection of the upper teeth. And then D is tetracycline staining, a darkening of the whole tooth that's due to taking tetracycline either just as an infant or sometimes in utero, and then much more darker tetracycline staining here. So this is obviously not dental fluorosis, sorry. And then this hyperplasia here, you can see it's a definite line, and this is due to developmental interruption at a certain period of time that could be due to a high fever. It could be due to a number of different systemic conditions that interferes with the normal development of teeth. And again, that's not dental fluorosis. We also used the NIDR publication at the time. Remember, NIDR is now the National Institute of Dental and Craniofacial Research. 1991, they had this document, and this is available online. You can look it up. And as part of this document, there were more photographs. We used the Explorer and the mouth mirror. This is the setup with a portable dental chair, a dental light with a stand, and then the examiner looking at the teeth of the individual who's lying down, and then recorder sitting by her or him. We had long hair in those days. The men did. And then examples of tooth decay and obvious cavitation, as well as not obvious tooth decay, with small pits here of tooth decay, or on the lingual pit of the upper incisors. That's a common site for pit and fissure decay that often isn't talked about. And then caries that starts in the enamel and produces this brown or cavitation area in these lower teeth here, these lower incisors, or on the mesial surface of a lower incisor here. Then other photographs of what dental students call bombed out teeth, where the whole crown has been destroyed by the tooth. This could have been a restoration that's lost. Here you've got a restoration, part of an amalgam, but also a lot of decay around it. You might question whether or not the decay was removed entirely at the time this tooth was filled. And then this photograph is interesting. You may not see this so much on surveys of young children, but we have tooth-colored fillings, and there's an obvious distal tooth-colored filling in this tooth here, and then a distal filling in this tooth here. And that could easily be overlooked in a survey. Obviously, these teeth are highly magnified. We don't see teeth as big as that. Here you've got a tooth on this lower incisor where the incisal edge has been restored by a composite restoration. And you may say, well, that's pretty good. Could be look better, but it could be missed easily. And then this dark area on the mesial surface here indicating decay, shining through the translucent enamel with some further decay on the adjacent tooth, maybe surrounding an existing restoration. So I just wanted you to be aware that when we do surveys, we're looking at photographs as well as descriptions. So for the 93-94 survey, we looked at Head Start children, non-Head Start children. That had not been done previously in surveys around the country, but we felt it was important. We looked at elementary schools. This is a traditional age group that's seen, K through 3. We also looked at high schools because I was aware of the tremendous need that high school students have for dental care, both regular high schools and continuation high schools, which are the schools that students go to if they were a high school dropout, for instance, and then they go back and to get a general certificate of education. So you've seen this photograph before. Our findings were for preschools that of all of those preschool children, 31% had some evidence of treated decay or untreated tooth decay. So that's the prevalence. That is, they had one or more decayed, missing, or filled teeth. But the converse of that is 69% had no evidence of having tooth decay, which was wonderful to see. When we see teeth that look like this, it's just wonderful. And they had 0 DMF. When we compared the different ethnic groups in different regions and the types of preschools, there was a wide range in terms of tooth decay for groups. And on average, there was 1.3 decayed, missing, and filled primary teeth per preschool child. So on average, everybody's got some decay, but not everybody. Asian children in the non-fluoridated urban areas and Head Start preschools have the highest percentage. About 80%, 79% of those children in those preschools, 4 out of 5, had untreated or treated tooth decay, with an average of 4.5 teeth affected. So we have the prevalence of 79%, and we have the severity of 4.5 teeth affected. Whereas the white children in the fluoridated urban areas and the non-Head Start preschools, more affluent preschools, were the group with the lowest percentage, a prevalence of only 10%, of untreated or treated tooth decay, where the average was 0.3 of a tooth. So great disparities in terms of tooth decay, who has it, and that allows us then to use that information and perhaps target our efforts at prevention. But that prevention obviously has to come before preschool. Then we look at grades K through 3 and looking only at lifetime residents by poverty status, because we had this information filled out by the parent before the examination in an extensive questionnaire. Below 200%, which is the standard for California in terms of poverty status, and above 200%, so the more affluent families. And what we found in terms of decayed and filled primary teeth, and the standard error of the mean, in the optimal fluoride areas, an average of 2.7 teeth affected for these K through 3 lifetime residents. In the poorer, from poorer families, whereas suboptimal fluoride was 1 tooth difference. They had 1 tooth more affected by tooth decay by virtue of the fact they lived in a suboptimal fluoride level. You see, the children of the more affluent parents are much better off. They have far fewer teeth affected. And the difference, although it's in the right direction, is not statistically significant, whereas the difference for the children from poor families was statistically significant. Looking at tooth surfaces, you see not only 1 tooth difference, but you see 2.3 surfaces difference, again statistically significant, with a difference in the more affluent children in the same direction, but not statistically significant. And then this is percent caries free, looking at prevalence. And you see that 36% of the poor children in the optimally fluoridated area were caries free compared to fewer children in a suboptimal fluoride area, with a greater percentage of more affluent children being caries free. But these were not statistically significant differences. Remembering that you just have to have 1 small cavity or filling to not be caries free compared to looking at severity indices. So I'm a big proponent of using severity and data rather than prevalence data. This slide is a little busy. What we've got is categories of decayed and filled teeth, whether it's primary or permanent teeth for 6 to 8 year old children. And in California in 93, 94, 73% of 6 to 8 year old children had some evidence of tooth decay compared to the national data that were available at the time of less than that, about 53 or 52%, whereas the National Healthy People Objectives was set to be a lower amount. So California doing worse than the country and definitely worse than the objectives set for the nation. Similarly, for those children whose parents have less than a high school education, for children who are Black or African American, for Latino, Hispanic children, on every category, it's worse in California, particularly worse for Asian children, but we can't say worse because there were no comparable data for children from Asia. Asia is obviously a huge continent with many, many different cultures, but we kind of group them together. This is too busy a slide to go through, so I'm just going to leave it. It just shows the difference for California, for carious lesions compared to the objective. And then this is untreated caries compared to the national objective. So on every score, every variable, California is worse off than the objective set for the nation. Here we compare for high school students in 10th grade, those that had 0 DMFS. They were caries free for the regular high schools, 23.8 or about 1 in 4. Children, students I should say, had no decay, whereas the older children in continuation high schools had far fewer caries free. And then those that had 9+ decayed, missing, filled surfaces, you see that almost half of the continuation high school students had a lot of decay or filled surfaces. And this compares the severity, whereas the previous slide looked at prevalence. This is severity, and you can see 6 teeth affected on average for the regular high school students in 10th grade compared to more than 8 in continuation high schools. But most of them are filled surfaces, which I'm happy to see. Far fewer are missing than some of the early 1930s, 1950s surveys that we saw for San Francisco and Oakland. But still a lot of decay untreated. We also found, comparing the situation for urgent treatment needs, this is not a caries index, but it is an index that's commonly used in surveys. So we look at children who have no treatment needs, who have some treatment needs but not urgent, and then those who have urgent treatment needs, where we indicate that those children should go see a dentist as soon as possible. And you can see in the fluoridated red columns here, far fewer of each group have urgent treatment needs compared to the urban, non-fluoridated areas. Again, giving much more good evidence that fluoridation is effective. I want to move forward now to the 2004-2005 survey. This is a map of California. They selected 204 schools originally, and in different regions, and the regions are indicated by the color of these dots. And you see there's a collection of more dots in the high population zones, and but it's very difficult in surveys to go to the remote areas of California. It's much more expensive to do that. Sorry, is there a question? Okay. I'm going to mute all again. You can unmute yourself if you have a question. And this report is a report called Mommy, It Hurts to Chew, and it was put out by the Center for Oral Health. Center for Oral Health is the new name for the Dental Health Foundation. Not so new anymore. And they screened some 21,000 or more children, half of whom were in kindergarten and half in third grade, in 186 participating schools. And what they looked for was decayed teeth, filled teeth, presence of dental sealants, history of rampant decay, decay experienced in 7 or more teeth, and treatment urgency. This was based upon the Association of State and Territorial Dental Directors recommendations for basic school surveys, basic screening surveys, which has been updated since then a few times. So when you look at the survey tool now, you'll see that it has changed. So this is the Mommy, It Hurts to Chew document, in which they found that half of the children screened were male, which is what you'd expect. 53% were Hispanic. That's the largest ethnic group in California of children now. 27% were non-Hispanic white, 8% were Asian, 7% were African American. 43% of the children screened were from homes where parents speak a language other than English. We have a salad bowl in California, sometimes called a melting pot, but it's more like a salad bowl in terms of multiple ethnicities and language groups, and that's why we have to put out communications in multiple languages. And more than half of the kindergartners and 70% of the third grade children screened had a history of tooth decay. That's a lot of kids. And untreated tooth decay was consistent across grades, with more than 1 out of 4 children having untreated tooth decay, over 25%. Remember I said earlier that our survey of the school-based dental disease prevention found that 80% of the disease was in 25% of the children. So these are some data from that survey, and this is kindergarten children. So you have percentage caries free, percentage with caries experience, with treated decay, untreated decay, with rampant caries, and you see 19% had 7 or more teeth affected, untreated by tooth decay. And 4.5% in urgent need of dental care. This is for the third grade children, where there were slightly more with rampant caries, 22%. 27% had dental sealants, and again around 4%, 4.2% needing urgent dental care. So obviously we have to provide that urgent dental care, but we also have to try to do what we can to prevent the tooth decay in the first place. So this is comparing the tooth surveys of 2004, 5, and 1993, 94. You see the total caries experience came down, and certainly untreated decay came down considerably. It was cut in half, pretty much. And the prevalence of dental sealants went up, more than doubled during that period, because in the earlier survey, there was no provision for dental sealants, or for dentists to be paid, reimbursed for dental sealants in the Medicaid program. So did dental sealants make the difference? Not all of the difference, probably, but there was certainly an increase in the attention to children with untreated decay. So this is for third grade, 4.5% reduction in caries experience, almost 50% reduction in untreated decay, but 140% increase in dental sealing. Now I want to switch to dental screening laws. These are the states that have dental screening laws. It includes California, but several other. And the one in California requires the children on entry into kindergarten or first grade into public school systems, may include private school systems, I'm not sure, be required to have a dental assessment. And there isn't really provision to reimburse those dentists or hygienists or whoever's doing the screening, but there is some small money available to the Department of Education to monitor this activity. So this law was enacted in 2006. At that time, it was called AB 1433. And it requires children to receive the assessment of his or her oral health as part of the school readiness activities for kindergarten entry. Now, in 2018, the law seems to have been updated to provide the state dental director with more oversight of the program. Thank you, Dr. Kumar. That includes data collection, and the number who are assessed and found to have untreated decay was always part of this. But the new thing for this school-based assessment, the kindergarten oral health assessment, is the number who are assessed and found to have experienced dental disease measured as either treated or untreated decay. So this now gives us a handle on has there been previous treatment. And you can see the legislation at this link. The California Dental Association has a terrific resource whereby you can look up for any county what the data are that have been submitted and reported kindergarten oral health assessments. And the assessment form includes the date of the evaluation, the presence of caries experience as evidenced by visible dental caries or dental restorations, the presence of visible untreated dental caries, assignment to a category of treatment urgency, urgent, early dental care, or no obvious problems. And that's a very useful assessment measure of treatment urgency that's fairly standardized across the country. So I took a look at some of the data that were available, and I wanted particularly to look at a couple of communities that have fluoridation but are encountering some opposition to fluoridation. So the community of Oroville in Butte County in California is fluoridated, but there seems to be some challenges to it. So I looked at the data, and for Oroville City Elementary in Butte County, 321 children were eligible to be screened, and 282 were actually screened. For untreated decay, 73 of them had untreated decay. There is some waiver that can be applied for by the parents to not have their children screened. Not too many of those occur there, or they may not consent, okay? And so these are the data for that particular school district in Butte. And this is for all of the children in Butte County. You can see that only about half of them actually were screened. And so I just compared the proportion of the children with untreated decay. This is just prevalence data. What's missing is the treated decay. So we don't know that. Now, the percent with untreated decay for Oroville, which is the fluoridated community, is about 26%, but for Butte County as a whole, including Oroville, is about 31%. So this could be used as evidence to indicate that there is less untreated tooth decay prevalence in the fluoridated community. But that doesn't take into consideration the percent with treated decay. So that's a caveat that we have to be mindful of. I'm down in Santa Maria, as I mentioned, in Santa Barbara County, because tonight Marjorie Stocks and I are going to be providing testimony to the City Council that stopped fluoridation 6 months ago after it had been instituted in 2002. So here in the Santa Maria Bonita Elementary School District in Santa Barbara County, there are 1,700 plus students eligible for this screening in kindergarten or first grade, primarily kindergarten, with about less than half of those, almost a third, more than a third of them actually being screened. 102 showed evidence of untreated decay. Compared to Santa Barbara as a whole, and you can see Santa Maria takes up a large portion of Santa Barbara as a whole. Just comparing these two, and again, what's missing is the treated decay. In terms of the percentage with untreated decay, you can see that for Santa Maria, which is fluoridated, about 15% had untreated decay, whereas for the county as a whole, more than 17%, 18% had tooth decay untreated. So this is some evidence that the fluoridation in Santa Maria may be helping, and probably is. But what I did then was I looked at comparing Santa Maria Bonita Elementary with the Santa Barbara, not including Santa Maria, and then compared the proportions there. And what we find is that, yes, 14.9% of the children screened in Santa Maria had untreated decay, but then a higher proportion, obviously, in Santa Barbara County, not including Santa Maria, had tooth decay. So this is some of the evidence that might be presented this evening. This is just a list of all of the elementary schools in the Santa Maria Elementary Schools District. Another community in Santa Barbara County adjacent to the city of Santa Barbara is Montecito, which is a more affluent community. But you can see that part, this is the water drinking report, sometimes called the Consumer Confidence Report for 2017, that groundwater average is just about optimum for fluoride levels that's recommended across the country, which is 0.7. And whereas it's not added, this is naturally occurring. You can see there are additional water sources that have much lower fluoride levels, but there doesn't seem to be an average for the water as a whole from Montecito. So there's some evidence that they have close to optimum fluoride level in part of their water source. You'll notice here that the maximum contaminant level for fluoride is 2 parts per million or milligrams per liter. Above that, it's advised that children under the age of 9 not consume drinking water on a regular basis because of the risk of developing leprosy. The public health goal for fluoride in drinking water in California is 1 part per million. That might have to be revisited since the national standard is now 0.7. So, Montecito, high socioeconomic status, some water is naturally fluoridated. They have a small number of children that were screened or eligible. It's a smaller community, but only 3 children have untreated decay. And when we compare the Montecito with Santa Barbara, not including Montecito, you see that only 5.5% of Montecito had untreated decay compared to 18.3%. This count goes along with the previous slide looking at children from more affluent families having much less tooth decay. Coming to a conclusion now, and then we'll save some time for discussion. So please be thinking of questions to write down in the chat line. In 2017, the state California Department of Public Health, Office of Oral Health, put out the document, Status of Oral Health in California, Oral Disease Burden and Prevention. And part of this, I'm showing a table here that looks, it's a busy table, but let me just explain what it is. So it looks at Healthy People 2020 objectives for the country, in terms of dental caries experience for young children aged 3 to 5 in their primary teeth. The target is 30%, no more than 30% have dental caries experience, fold, unfold. The baseline was 33% based upon national data. And the California baseline was 20% more, considerably more. For the second group, age 6 to 9, looking at primary and permanent teeth, you see California has a lot more tooth decay than the US baseline or the target. And for adolescents, we didn't have the data for 13 to 15-year-olds put into this baseline data, although we have 10th grade children who are probably 16-year-olds. Untreated tooth decay, young children, again, California data shows slightly higher. So we're taking care of a lot of the treatment of the children, but it's not at the national level or at the objective. And it's very, it's exactly the same pretty much as the baseline data for California compared to the nation as a whole. But we still have some ways to go to get down to the 25.9% level. And we don't have the data for 13, 15-year-olds. Now, the document says there's no California on adult caries prevalence or severity, but we do have a recent older survey of adults that was done by the Center for Oral Health. And so my next slide just shows some of that. The document's called The Healthy Smile Never Gets Older. It was issued in March of 2018 by the Center for Oral Health. This is the link to that document so you can see it. And also you should know that Sahiti Bhaskara, who was the principal investigator for that study, gave a presentation in this seminar series last year at about this time, almost exactly a year ago. And what they found was, in terms of untreated tooth decay, or large numbers of older adults suffering from untreated tooth decay, half the older adults residing in skilled nursing facilities have untreated tooth decay. More than 1 in 3 community dwelling older adults suffer from untreated tooth decay. In other words, it's a big problem for older adults. So this is my summary slide, and then I will try to answer your questions and we can have a discussion between ourselves. Caries in California has been a public health problem for decades. Community water fluoridation to reduce the burden of caries has been studied and promoted for decades. More caries in children from poor families than in children from more affluent families. Fluoridation reduces disparities in caries between children from poor families and those from more affluent families. In spite of reduced caries severity with fluoridation, caries continues to be a public health problem for low-income groups and for seniors. Caries severity, this is my pitch, is a more sensitive indicator of the burden of tooth decay than caries prevalence, but I think we need both. It's easier to get caries prevalence data and agreement on that. So for discussion, I'd like to have a discussion on should we or how should we continue caries surveillance, and what strategies should be used to reduce caries. So I'm going to open it up now, and I would prefer that you use the chat line because that allows us not to be all talking at the same time. Well, I'm not seeing any questions or people willing to communicate by the chat line. It's possible some people are on the phone and can't use the chat line, so I decide to unmute you all, although you can all unmute yourselves.
Are you American Eagle?
No, we're getting a lot of background noise, so I'm gonna mute you all, and then you can individually unmute yourself. So I'm just going to read what Jay Kuma has written. The California Oral Health Plan 2018 to 2028 outlines the targets and strategies and surveillance plan. And so I did not include that. I apologize for not being totally comprehensive. And there are some other surveys that I have not included. But Jay's quite right. We should be using that California Oral Health Plan to look at these, how we plan to deal with caries in California. So thank you, Jay, for that. So a question from one of our incoming dental public health residents. Can we include dental care into primary care? And then another one, where have we had the best success moving to the more recent survey? So can we include dental care into primary care? Certainly primary care for very young children has more and more included preventive strategies like fluoride varnish, and that's now recommended and is now paid for, so that in the poorest families can get their children assessed by the pediatrician or the family care provider, and dental fluoride varnish can be applied. So I think that is a step forward. We don't know whether or not how successful that strategy is yet, at least here in California. In terms of where we had the best success moving in more recent surveys, in terms of success, I think periodically, what should we focus on moving forward? I think we should focus, obviously, in the as Jay has pointed out in the oral health plan for California. Thank goodness we've got some funding now for including more surveillance activities. I think we need to continue those. Measuring the status of children coming into school system is one way to assess how well strategies that are occurring before children get into school is successful. But it doesn't address the older groups, but I think we have to focus where we can on the youngest children with limited resources. So Jay points out here that tooth decay prevalence, or caries prevalence, which I think is untreated caries prevalence, has declined from 60 to 32%. And we have seen this across the board, he says, in kindergarten children in the last 17 years. I think we've seen this across the board in terms of treated caries. The question is, which groups are benefiting more than others, which groups are getting left behind in terms of ethnic groups, low-income groups, etc. So these will always be our concerns, and we have to really address early childhood caries and the strategies that we can adopt prior to that. With the use of SDF, silver diamine fluoride, what are the criteria survey surveillance are using to distinguish between arrested and untreated decay? That's from one of our previous residents, Sarah Gazal, who's sitting in British Columbia. Thank you for the question. I don't know. It's a really good question. I think we know that it will arrest caries in the majority of cases, the vast majority of cases. So it doesn't advance to the more complicated kinds of root canal treatments that are needed, for extractions. It will be easier to see a cavity if it's got silver diamine fluoride because it'll be black. But I haven't seen survey criteria that include the use of SDF and how that's going to change the appearance of teeth when it's applied. Like I say, most of those teeth will appear black and make it easy to do surveillance. But it won't distinguish between an active lesion and inactive lesion or arrested lesion. So that remains to be seen. Question comes in, can we focus more effort on improving payment systems, differentiating between those children who have Medi-Cal versus covered California dental plans? I think payment for Medi-Cal has increased across the board, and particularly with the Dental Transformation Initiative, the counties that are participating in that. That assessment, those evaluations have not been reported on yet. They're not due for a couple of years yet. So those strategies for that have been employed for improving the situation with regard to caries, we look forward to seeing those evaluations. In terms of improving payment systems, we know that, as I mentioned, not only dentists, but pediatricians can be reimbursed for the application of fluoride varnish for very young children. So we hope that that is being utilized much more. So I think we're coming towards the end of our time, and I appreciate everybody's participation. I want to say thank you to everybody to paying attention, staying with us during this time period. And hopefully those documents that I provided you will be of some use to you. And I look forward to participating perhaps as a participant rather than a speaker at future presentations. So as I mentioned earlier, excuse me, as I mentioned earlier, we will not be holding this in the summer as usual, but we will be back in the fall. So at this point, I think I'm going to stop sharing my screen, if I can figure out how to do that. And I'm going to end the meeting. Thank you all so much.